Hi everybody, welcome to Brew. This is where indie developers can send their games and I give feedback on their game design, or at least I try my best to give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon Keys and today we're going to take a look at a game called Control Override. This was developed by B-Deshidev and submitted to us by Fahim. From what I've played so far, the game is an inventive single-screen puzzle platformer that's focused on movement to get to the finish, and it focuses on movement in like a different way than most games would. You have to assign movement as opposed to just use it. The footage you're seeing is from a pre-release version of the game, and if you want to find out more, you can check the link in the description. Let's do this. Just regular cold brew with me today. I'm not a huge Giants fan, by the way. I just have a Giants hat. Okay, so before we start this whole thing, it's important that you who's watching this, whoever you are, to understand where it is that I'm coming from when I'm talking about this kind of stuff. So game design in general is about creating systems and tools for the player to use, and then the game itself is about the execution of those systems and tools. And so that's what I'm trying to do here, is I'm trying to figure out how well the player can understand the game that they're playing. First, I want to talk about what I think works in the game. So the first level in this game is quite perfect. Game design wise, I really like how this happens. So it says, hold the left mouse button, and what's really nice there is that I didn't do that. I didn't hold, I just clicked. And what you can see happen there is that the menu just comes up only when you click. So right here, click and then let go and then it changed. So those are contextual prompts. So I really, really like contextual prompts because they focus on interaction to actually mean anything. So instead of just reading something and being like, oh, okay, it looks like I gotta aim, it only tells you that while you're doing the first thing. So I really like that a lot. So this makes a lot of sense in a video game, and then it only tells you this part right here, the release left mouse button to absorb control only when you're highlighting that thing. So a really good way to start the game, because this gets pretty complex later on, but it's pretty simple to figure out what you're doing right off the bat. So that's really nice. Another thing I really like was the silent tutorial of the second level. So the second level here, we have these arrows. Again, we've already done this part in the first level, so I really like that it's here so that someone goes, oh, okay, I want to get that. And then once they go this way and then drop, then they understand immediately what to do after that. So as you can see, we come down here and get that one, and it's just easy to automatically know what's going on. Another thing I really like was the fourth level here. The fourth level is quite perfect, that I think. Again, we just have very simple to understand rules. We've never tried up before, so we try it, boom, got it. Now we got the loves out of the way. Now it's time to talk about some of the stuff that I thought needed a little bit of work. Let's look at the very beginning of the game where we have the menu options, and you can see the highlighting is over a word, and that, obviously means when you have selected something. What's a little strange about this is that you can select with the arrow keys or your cursor, but both highlights show up. So it looks like you're selecting two things at once. I think that may have been a programming error, but something you should be aware of. Another thing I want to talk about is the opening text crawl. Immediately after you click start on the game, this happens where we get a code, coming in, and it looks like a chat between two people, you and this Rossi guy. One, I think that's just way too fast, at least for someone like me to read it. I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm a slow reader. One thing about this kind of information that's being said to the player is that this might be narrative information, and they might need to know what it means. I'm not sure. I don't know if the player actually does need to know, but it seems like they do need to know since it's unskippable. There's no skip button over here because you do have a skip button later on. But right here, I don't know who Rossi is. I don't know who Miral is. I don't know what Gone Rogue means. I don't know who I am. So it's a lot of information to take in all at once. And because the whole thing is really fast, it's hard to, figure out exactly what's going on. What I thought would really work is if the player, instead of just, saying that you said this, if you can actually have the player, have a little prompt here, little prompts that say, I'm in. Wow, that's really bad. Or no, or something like that, and then they could, choose which one to say. What that would do is it would let them, read it first, understand what's going on here first, and then they could respond with, whatever button. Now, it doesn't really matter about the player choice at this moment. It gives the player some engagement to try to, get them into the narrative a little bit more and get them engaged in the game. Anyway, so that's just my personal recommendation or suggestion. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the following screen right here. Not this one, but right after this one right here, where it looks like we're just, looking at some code, but the speed is the same speed as the code before it. And so because of that, it makes me think as the player, because I was supposed to read this stuff, or it seems like I'm supposed to read it, then it means because it's the same speed on the next screen that I'm supposed to read this stuff too. But obviously it doesn't really matter, at least it doesn't seem that way because there's a skip, thing right here. So it must not be that important for the player to try to, read all this. I think what you're trying to do is you're creating just an environment, and I think that environment really works, but I would speed up like the whole, thing. Like it just doesn't need to be here for that long, at least I don't think so. So now we're gonna get to something a little bit more hefty here, and that's the control scheme. The control scheme in this whole game is really, really complex. I really, really like it because it's really inventive, or at least I haven't seen a game that's done this kind of stuff before. So, what happens is you fire a ray at a place that you want to control, or you fire a ray at an arrow, and that arrow provides you with control. Now, what's strange about this game is that, or what's strange about this mechanic is that in other games, usually you have just arrows. In other games, you have movement that's permanent, right? Like you can go left or you can go right or jump or whatever, and it's just that way forever. In this game, it's not that way forever. You have to choose your movement every single time. It's inventive. It's really, really inventive, but it also makes it really complex for somebody who hasn't done that stuff before. Right here, this is the third level, and I think the third level's trying to explain, the best it can, but I don't feel like it explains much very well. So it says fire a ray at the purple platform to transfer control. Now, the sentence itself makes sense. When you say transfer control, that makes sense. The player doesn't really know that transferring control means giving up their control. They don't know that they lose the control after they give it to something else. That is what transfer means. You're literally saying what you're supposed to do. But I think it can be conveyed better in the interactive situation. So when the player does this, or at least when I did this, I knew that I was controlling the platform, I knew I was controlling myself, but I didn't understand why I couldn't go to the right. I constantly found myself during this game pressing keys that didn't do anything for me. So for example, in this level, I kept pressing right even though I wouldn't go anywhere. Because I wasn't doing this puzzle properly, I tried to figure out, how do I reset? There must be a simple way to reset, but I didn't really figure it out. I just eventually paused the game, and then there's this little button that says rewind here. And I was like, what does rewind mean? So I tried it, and it didn't do anything. And then I was just like, okay, well, let's just go to restart then. What I didn't realize was later on in this level, when you fall into the pit, it says backspace to rewind. I think what's happening here is we're trying to teach too many things at once. So we have firing rays at platforms, but then you no longer have your power. You fire the power that you're currently selecting, and you can rewind to back up, and you can use platforms to move. These are all the things that players need to learn at this moment, but it seems like, that's a lot of stuff to throw them all at once. The first thing, firing rays gives other things your power, does make sense. Right here, I like how we have the platform is a different color than everything, so it gives a nice contrast. It draws your eye. It says, oh, that's what I need to fire at. And so that's what you do, you fire at that thing. So that's really cool. However, after you fire, you lose your power. Now this is the first time that's ever happened. The two levels before this, if you see right here, we had only absorbing the power. We had absorbing the going to the right, and then we had absorbing power going to the right and to the left, but we've never dealt with losing power before. Another thing that we're saying is that we're firing the power that we're currently selecting. Now, in this part of the game, in the second and first levels, we didn't really understand at any point that we are currently selecting anything when we press a button. There's nothing saying that we are selecting something. The square does appear orange first, and then when you get a direction, then you turn blue when you're using it. Then when you're using that direction, it turns blue, and when you're not using, it turns orange. So I really like that. That's really cool. But I didn't know that using the direction also means you're selecting the direction. So that was a little strange to me. And that's important because here you have to fire the one that you're selecting. You can't fire the one that you're not selecting. I think what's really important here is to teach all of these things in isolation. So like you did in the beginning here, you're only teaching aim and then fire, and that's basically it. So I really like that because it's super isolated. And then the challenge that follows in the second level is, again, very simple because it's very isolated. Another thing I want to talk about is this puzzle right here. This one took me a long time to figure out, 4 minutes as opposed to the, less than a minute that I did with the other ones. So as you can see, we have the arrow on this side of the wall. So I really like that idea of trying to force the player to think laterally. I think that's interesting because it changes the way, you approach a puzzle. However, I think their motivation is still kind of toward that arrow. So for me, at least, I know when I was trying to get the arrow, I was still figuring out how do I get that arrow right there, because that's all I've been doing in the other levels. So I figured that's what I must do in this one too. However, I think if we just took away that arrow completely, then the player would be forced to try to figure out, how do I get over here without moving to the right? So I think taking out that arrow completely actually would have just fixed the motivation issue completely. So something else I would like to talk about is my feelings while playing the game. One of the things I really like doing is trying to analyze why players felt certain ways while they were playing a game. If I was playing a game and I started feeling like, I'm not into it anymore, I'm trying to figure out why am I not into it anymore. So one of those feelings that came over me when I was playing this game was when I got to the 9th level. I was a little frustrated because I had been, pushing the wrong buttons, and then I finally got to the finish and I felt like this, I felt like a burden had been lifted, instead of feeling that feeling of accomplishment, I finally finished that puzzle. It was, oh man, finally I finished that puzzle, because I was so frustrated. When I got to this part, we're introducing the look around mechanic. And so I start looking around and I'm like, oh wow, that's a lot more than I wanted to do. And then I start getting lethargic, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if I want to play this game anymore. It felt obligatory at this moment. It didn't feel like a challenge. It felt like something that I had to do. And I think the reason why it felt that way, I think subconsciously, I never really understood the mechanics completely, fully grasped them. So when I look at something that's like a large amount of challenge here, it's knowing that I have to do something that I don't really understand how to do. So I felt, less confident about going forward, and it makes me not want to continue anymore. If you've ever tried to introduce a game to a non-gamer, they get pretty frustrated when they can't do the things that they've never been trained to do before. So if you've ever, watch somebody play like a first-person shooter for the first time, like Halo for the very first time, and they're like jumping around in corners and they just don't know how to go forward. It can be really frustrating for them because they don't really grasp everything. They don't really fully understand everything that's in front of them. So the return on investment that they're getting is not very good. They're putting in a ton of effort to get not really anything back. The reason why we have tutorial levels, the reason why the first half of the game Portal was all a tutorial, is because we want to build up incrementally this skill. We want to instill a skill, and when that player can master that skill and feel like they really understand the game, it's after that point that they feel like they can actually face challenges. Then they can focus on the execution instead of the learning process. So for the sake of this gameplay, I went ahead and just forced myself through it. And, it was obligatory, but I did it. But then afterwards, what was interesting was my interest started getting up again. So I came to this level and I was like, oh, this is interesting. It's a very different challenge from all the other ones. It's all vertical, and I have to do this thing where I have to go backwards. That's a really, really interesting puzzle. And I went forwards after this one, and this puzzle was really interesting to me because it dealt with platforms that were much bigger than I'd ever seen before, and that was really cool. I had a lot of fun trying to figure out, how to block these lasers and everything. I thought it was a really interesting challenge. So I feel like maybe in this game, you would probably want to add more of those incremental little things, tiny wins, tiny steps, puzzles that don't take a whole lot of grasp in order to go forward and complete. So that we can instill that skill in the player. We really want them to feel like a master at the game when they play it. that's all I have for today, you guys. If you have a game and you'd like the same kind of treatment that I've given here, there's a submission link in the description below. Just click on that, submit me the game, and you'll appear in a future episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you did learn something from this video, please, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and I'm gonna go play some more games.